What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors comes face to face with a host who thinks he can bulldoze his way through an interview? What you're about to witness is the moment Samuel L. Jackson had absolutely enough of George Stephanopoulos and his condescending attitude. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in standing up to media manipulation. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about journalists who cross the line. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studios. Samuel L. Jackson had arrived early, as he always did, prepared to discuss his latest film project. The veteran actor, known for his professionalism and no-nonsense attitude, settled into the interview chair across from George Stephanopoulos. What neither the audience nor the production crew knew was that this would become one of the most explosive interviews in morning television history. "Good morning. I'm here with the legendary Samuel L. Jackson." George began with his practiced television smile. "Sam, thanks for being here." Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly at the casual use of his nickname. "It's Samuel, George. And thank you for having me." "Right, of course," George replied, though his tone suggested he didn't really care about the correction. "So let's talk about your new movie. But first, I have to ask about some of the controversy surrounding your recent comments about the film industry." Samuel leaned back in his chair, already sensing where this was heading. "What controversy would that be, George?" "Well, you've been quite vocal about certain issues, and some people are saying you're being divisive. Don't you think as a public figure, you should be more careful about your words?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Samuel's expression remained calm, but those who knew him could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. "Divisive? That's an interesting word choice, George. Are you suggesting that speaking truth is divisive?" "I'm not suggesting anything," George shot back, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "I'm asking if you think your platform comes with responsibility." "My platform?" Samuel's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet tone that had made him famous in countless films. "George, let me ask you something. When you sit in that chair and decide what questions to ask, what stories to cover, what narrative to push, do you think about responsibility?" George's practiced smile faltered for just a moment. "I think we're getting off track here, Sam." "Samuel." The actor corrected again, his patience clearly wearing thin. "And no, I think we're right on track. You invited me here to talk about my work, and instead you want to lecture me about responsibility? That's rich coming from someone in your position." The tension in the studio was palpable. Camera operators glanced nervously at each other, and the production assistant in the corner had stopped pretending to shuffle papers. George, however, seemed determined to press forward with his confrontational approach. "Look, Samuel, I'm just asking the questions that our viewers want answered," George said, leaning forward aggressively. "Your recent statements have raised eyebrows." "Whose eyebrows, George? Yours? Your producers? Or are you speaking for all of America now?" Samuel's voice carried that unmistakable edge that had made him one of the most commanding presences in Hollywood. "Because I've got news for you. Most Americans appreciate honesty, even when it makes people uncomfortable." George's face was starting to redden, and his professional composure was beginning to crack. "I think you're being defensive here." "Defensive?" Samuel let out a short, humorless laugh. "George, I've been in this business longer than you've been on television. I've faced down critics, studio executives, and journalists who actually knew how to do their jobs. You think I'm being defensive because I won't let you twist my words into your narrative?" The host shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly not expecting this level of pushback. "I'm not twisting anything. I'm simply asking you to clarify your position." "My position is clear to anyone who actually listened to what I said, instead of reading whatever clickbait headline you got your talking points from," Samuel replied, his voice growing stronger. "But let me clarify something for you right now, George. I didn't come here to be ambushed by someone who thinks gotcha journalism is the same thing as actual reporting." George's mask was slipping now, and his true colors were starting to show. "I think you're overreacting, Sam. This is just a conversation." "There you go again with the Sam," Samuel said, shaking his head. "And this isn't a conversation, George. A conversation requires mutual respect. What you're doing is trying to create controversy where none exists because you think it makes for good television." The studio had gone completely silent except for the low hum of the cameras still rolling. George was visibly flustered now, his carefully constructed on-air persona crumbling under Samuel's relentless honesty. "I don't appreciate your tone," George said, his voice taking on an authoritative edge that revealed his true character. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "You don't appreciate my tone? George, you invited me onto your show, tried to ambush me with loaded questions, repeatedly disrespected me by refusing to use my actual name, and now you have the audacity to tell me you don't like my tone?" "I think we should move on to discussing your film," George said, clearly trying to regain control of the interview. "Oh, now you want to talk about my film?" Samuel's voice dripped with sarcasm. "After spending the first 10 minutes trying to create some manufactured controversy? How generous of you, George." The host's face was now visibly red, and his hands were fidgeting with his notes. "Look, I'm trying to conduct a professional interview here." "Professional?" Samuel leaned forward, his piercing gaze fixed on George. "George, let me tell you what professional looks like. Professional is doing your homework before an interview. Professional is treating your guests with respect. Professional is asking substantive questions about their work instead of fishing for sound bites. What you're doing here isn't professional. It's amateur hour." George's jaw tightened at Samuel's assessment, and any pretense of maintaining his television persona completely evaporated. "I've been doing this for decades. I don't need lectures from you about how to conduct an interview." "Decades?" Samuel's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Well, then that makes this even more embarrassing for you, doesn't it? Because if this is what decades of experience looks like, maybe it's time for a career change." The words hit George like a physical blow. His face flushed an even deeper shade of red, and his voice took on a nastier edge. "You know what? I think our viewers are seeing the real you right now. This attitude, this arrogance." Samuel's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped to that deadly quiet tone that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "The real me, George? You want to see the real me? The real me is someone who has spent 40 years in this industry earning respect through hard work, talent, and treating people with dignity. The real me is someone who doesn't have to hide behind a desk and attack guests to feel important." "I'm not attacking anyone," George protested, but his voice cracked slightly. "Really?" Samuel tilted his head. "So when you invite someone onto your show under the pretense of discussing their work, then immediately launch into accusations and loaded questions, what would you call that? Professional courtesy?" George was scrambling now, trying to regain any semblance of control. "I'm asking legitimate questions that our audience wants answered." "Your audience," Samuel repeated slowly. "George, do you really think your audience is sitting at home hoping to watch you disrespect a guest? Or do you think maybe, just maybe, they tune in to actually learn something about the people you're supposed to be interviewing?" The host's hands were visibly shaking now as he shuffled through his notes. "I think you're being paranoid. These are standard interview questions." Samuel let out a genuine laugh, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Standard? George, I've done thousands of interviews in my career. I've sat across from journalists from every major network, every major publication, every major media outlet in the world. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that what you're doing here is not standard, it's not professional, it's not journalism, it's a hatchet job." "That's completely unfair," George shot back, his voice rising. "I'm trying to have a serious discussion here." "Serious discussion?" Samuel's voice was incredulous. "George, a serious discussion requires preparation, respect, and genuine curiosity about your guest. You've shown none of those things. Instead, you've shown up with what appears to be a predetermined agenda to make me look bad, and you're frustrated because it's not working." George was beginning to sweat now, and his carefully styled hair was starting to look disheveled. "I don't have any agenda except getting to the truth." "The truth?" Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression one of complete disbelief. "George, the truth is that you're sitting there with a list of gotcha questions written by your producers, trying to create controversy where none exists because actual journalism is too much work for you." The accusation clearly stung, and George's response was immediate and defensive. "You don't know anything about my process or my preparation." "Your preparation?" Samuel's voice was dripping with sarcasm. "George, Your preparation was so thorough that you couldn't even be bothered to learn my actual name. Your preparation was so extensive that you decided to skip over everything I've actually accomplished and jump straight to manufactured controversy. That's not preparation, that's laziness disguised as ambush journalism. George was visibly struggling now, his composure completely shattered. I think you're being extremely unreasonable here. Unreasonable? Samuel's eyes flashed with genuine anger. George, what's unreasonable is inviting someone onto your show and then treating them like they're on trial. What's unreasonable is pretending to be a journalist while acting like a tabloid gossip columnist. What's unreasonable is your complete lack of professionalism and basic human decency. The host was now fidgeting constantly, clearly out of his depth. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Wrong foot? Samuel shook his head in amazement. George, you didn't get off on the wrong foot. You started running in the wrong direction, and you're still going. And instead of acknowledging that you've completely blown this interview, you're trying to make it my fault. George's voice took on a pleading quality. I'm trying to salvage this interview. Salvage? Samuel's laugh was harsh. George, this interview was unsalvageable the moment you decided to ambush me instead of doing your job. You can't salvage something that was broken from the beginning by your own incompetence. The word incompetence hit George like a slap in the face. His eyes flashed with anger and humiliation. I don't have to sit here and be insulted by you. Samuel's response was immediate and cutting. You don't have to sit here at all, George. You chose to sit here. You chose to invite me on your show. You chose to conduct yourself unprofessionally. And now you're choosing to play the victim when someone calls you out on your behavior. That's not very becoming for someone in your position. George was now clearly desperate to regain some semblance of authority. I think our viewers can judge for themselves who's being unreasonable here. You're absolutely right about that. Samuel agreed, his voice calm but deadly. Your viewers are watching this right now, and they're seeing exactly what kind of host you really are. They're seeing how you treat guests who don't roll over and play along with your little games. They're seeing the real George Stephanopoulos, and I don't think it's a pretty picture. The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Camera operators were frozen in place, producers were whispering frantically into their headsets, and George was sitting there looking like a man who had just realized he was in way over his head. I've been nothing but professional, George said weakly, making one last desperate attempt to save face. Samuel looked at him with something approaching pity. George, if this is what you call professional, then I feel sorry for every guest who has ever sat in this chair. Because professional doesn't mean attacking people. Professional doesn't mean disrespecting people. Professional doesn't mean trying to create controversy for ratings. Professional means treating people with dignity and respect, something you failed to do from the moment I sat down. George's face was now a deep shade of crimson, and his voice cracked as he made one final attempt to assert his authority. I think you need to check your attitude, Sam. This is my show. The use of Sam again, combined with the condescending tone, was the final straw. Samuel's eyes went cold, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of his decades in Hollywood. Your show? George, let me tell you something about shows. A show requires talent, preparation, and respect for your audience and your guests. What you're running here isn't a show, it's a circus, and you're the clown. George's mouth fell open in shock. No guest had ever spoken to him like this on live television. How dare you? How dare I what? Samuel interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. How dare I expect to be treated with basic human decency? How dare I call out your unprofessional behavior? How dare I refuse to be your punching bag for whatever ratings grab you think this is supposed to be? The host was now stammering, completely rattled. You can't talk to me like this. I'm the host here. Being the host doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful, Samuel shot back. Being the host means you have a responsibility to your guests and your audience. A responsibility you've completely abdicated in favor of this pathetic attempt at gotcha journalism. George was now visibly shaking, his carefully constructed on-air persona in complete ruins. I don't think you understand how this works. Samuel leaned forward, his gaze never leaving George's face. "Oh, I understand exactly how this works, George. You invite guests on, you treat them poorly, you try to create controversy, and then you act surprised when someone has the backbone to call you out on it. Well, congratulations, George. Today you found someone who won't play your little game. This is completely unprofessional," George protested weakly. "You want to talk about unprofessional?" Samuel's voice was now filled with righteous indignation. "Unprofessional is what you've been doing for the past 20 minutes. Unprofessional is ambushing guests. Unprofessional is disrespecting people who take time out of their schedules to appear on your show. Unprofessional is using your platform to try to tear people down instead of having genuine conversations." George was now looking around desperately, clearly hoping someone would step in and save him from this verbal dismantling. "I think we should take a commercial break." "Oh, now you want a break?" Samuel's laugh was bitter. "What's wrong, George? Having trouble handling the heat when someone pushes back? This is what happens when you pick on someone who isn't going to roll over and take your abuse." The host's voice was now barely above a whisper. "I wasn't abusing anyone." "No?" Samuel's eyebrows shot up. "Then what would you call repeatedly using the wrong name after being corrected? What would you call launching into accusations without any basis? What would you call treating a guest like they're on trial instead of having a conversation? If that's not abuse of your position, then what is?" George was now slumped in his chair, looking defeated. "I was just doing my job." Samuel shook his head in disgust. "George, if this is what you think your job is, then you're in the wrong profession. Your job is supposed to be informing the public, not attacking people for sport. Your job is supposed to be facilitating meaningful conversations, not creating fake controversies. Your job is supposed to be serving your audience, not serving your own ego." The studio was now in complete chaos. Producers were frantically signaling from behind the cameras, trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of the show. But Samuel wasn't finished. "You know what the really sad part is, George?" Samuel continued, his voice now carrying a note of genuine disappointment. "You have this platform, this opportunity to actually make a difference, to inform people, to have real conversations about important issues. And instead, you waste it on this petty, small-minded garbage." George tried one last desperate gambit. "I think you're overreacting to standard interview questions." "Standard?" Samuel's voice was incredulous. "George, there was nothing standard about this ambush, nothing standard about your disrespectful behavior, nothing standard about your complete lack of preparation and professionalism. And you know what? I'm done pretending otherwise." The host's face went pale as he realized what was coming. "What do you mean?" Samuel stood up slowly, his full height and presence commanding the attention of everyone in the studio. "I mean, I'm done with this farce, George. I came here in good faith to talk about my work, and instead I got subjected to this amateur hour performance. I have better things to do with my time than sit here and be disrespected by someone who clearly doesn't know how to do his job." "You can't just leave," George said desperately, his voice rising in panic. Samuel was already reaching for his microphone, preparing to remove it. "Watch me, George. And while you're watching, maybe you can learn something about what dignity and self-respect look like." George was now standing too, his face a mixture of anger and humiliation. "This is completely unprofessional behavior." Samuel paused in removing his microphone and looked at George with something approaching pity. "George, the only unprofessional behavior here has been yours. And the fact that you can't see that even now tells me everything I need to know about why this interview went the way it did." "You're making a mistake," George said, his voice cracking with desperation. "The only mistake I made was agreeing to come on this show in the first place," Samuel replied, finally freeing himself from the microphone. "But I won't make that mistake again." George made one final, pathetic attempt to save face. "I think our viewers will see who the real problem is here." Samuel turned back to look at George one last time, and his expression was one of complete disdain. "You're absolutely right about that, George. They will see exactly who the real problem is. And it's not me." With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the set, leaving George Stephanopoulos sitting alone at the desk, his face red with humiliation, his hands shaking, and his reputation in tatters. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of George's complete professional meltdown, and viewers across America, got to see exactly what happens when an unprepared, disrespectful host tries to take on someone who refuses to be intimidated. The silence that followed Samuel's exit was deafening. George sat there for what felt like an eternity, clearly unsure of how to proceed. His carefully constructed image as a professional broadcaster lay in ruins around him, destroyed by his own arrogance and incompetence. And that, folks, is how one of Hollywood's most respected actors showed the world what it looks like when you stand up to media bullies who think they can push people around just because they have a platform. Samuel L. Jackson didn't just walk off that set. He walked away with his dignity intact, while leaving George Stephanopoulos to face the consequences of his own unprofessional behavior. What did you think of Samuel's response to George's disrespectful treatment? Was he right to walk off, or should he have stayed and continued the interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.